It was very tough, but very enjoyable. And I was the only woman on the staff for the writers, you see. So I had to be very tough, too, and I was. And it was very much, as people called, the boys of St. Michael's. It was like a school. We were doing a film called Dance Hall. Sandy and I were writing it, and Charlie Crichton was directing it. And there was one part in which Donald Houston had arrived with his girlfriend and went out of the dance hall and stood there. And the boys all said, he's contemplating suicide. And I said, how do you know? Do you have a balloon coming out of his head saying, I'm contemplating suicide? Is there a special look on his face? This went on all day. Sandy and me, Sandy and me, Sandy and me, Angus MacPhail, everybody. 6:45, Sandy looked at his watch and said, the bitch is right. We went over the Red Lion.
Ealing at that stage was going through a period in which their great ambition was to break into the American market. And Michael Ralph, who's a producer who was still around, who was a production designer, and his companion, Basil Dearden, had decided that they would make a really enormous epic film which was full of, quote, production values. It was planned to have huge sets and be the most costly film perhaps that Ealing had made to that date, locations in Czechoslovakia and so on.
We wanted some high shots, from the roofs, and he, I think, went up every single steeple in Czechoslovakia, in Prague rather, and I started off going up some of them, although I hate heights. And eventually, I discovered that really, by standing in the street below, you could tell that 90% of them were no good. But Stanley still went up and looked from the top every single time. He just would leave no stone unturned.
The reason why they took me on was that they felt, I think probably correctly, that words were not my strong point, certainly not dialogue. And so I had developed a certain knack for thinking in terms of visual action, and they thought I could bring to this sort of lavish thing a certain sort of pictorial abilities. At Ealing, I really felt I discovered later that I had been enormously spoiled, because I'm not really awfully interested in the deal-making and the financial aspects of setting up movies. I'm not interested in it because I'm not very good at it. I know it sounds sympathetic to say that you're not really interested in the money-making, but that really is a self-indulgence, because you have to remember that the money-making is what the business is about. The deal is the real product, and the movie is a sort of incidental byproduct of the deal.
Even though Mackendrick was paid as a writer, Ealing let him make a movie, but for the same money. Whiskey Galore was to be shot all on location, like many Ealing films, and all on the island of Barra.
A happy people with few and simple pleasures. The little island of Tuddy is a completely isolated community, 100 miles from the mainland, 100 miles from the nearest cinema or dance hall. Oh, but the islanders know how to enjoy themselves. They have all that they need. Slanzava. But in 1943, disaster overwhelmed this little island. Not famine nor pestilence, nor Hitler's bombs, or the hordes of an invading army, but something far, far worse.
There is no whiskey. Three-quarters way through, he suddenly sat in Castleby, I remember, in Barra, and said, "I've decided I'm not making a comedy, I'm making a documentary of island life," which is typically Sandy.
They got in a slight mess in the cutting room, and I came into the studio one day and found that they thought of turning it into a sort of second feature, and because I loved the subject, I got sort of het up about it. So Mickey Balkan said, "All right, go into the cutting room and see what you can do with it." So I did that, and every time I said to Sandy, "Well, I think this sequence should go like this, A, B, C, D," he said, "Of course, I mean, that's the way I intended it."
Is there anything the matter, Mother?
To think that I should be hearing from others that my own son is going to be married. George Campbell, is this true?
Well, I only knew myself yesterday evening that Katrina...
I remember the old postmistress saying to Sandy at one point, "I don't think I'd be in this shot, Mr. Mackendrick. I wasn't in the other angle. I'm not in this particular..." So we corrupted them all. They were all high-powered actors and actresses by the time we left.
By the time I got back, you'd gone to bed.
The bed I have made for myself and on which I must lie.
It was absolutely terrifying. For me, it took the form of getting very bad asthma. It was a rather hot summer and I couldn't sleep. And one of the reasons that I married my present wife is that I remember getting up in the middle of the night and crawling on hands and knees to the only telephone booth on the island to phone up my girlfriend, as she was then, and complain that I was thinking of committing suicide. And instead of getting any sympathy, I got a terrible bawling out, and she said, "It's only a film." And I hung up and walked back and went fast asleep, because I thought an ideal wife for a movie director.
What was your cargo? 50,000 cases of whiskey. 50,000 cases of...
Whiskey Galore was a surprising success, one of the first British movies that stormed the art house circuit in America and made real money. But even at Ealing, you had to wait for your next movie. And it was 2 years before Mackendrick could start work on what was to be a classic, The Man in the White Suit.
The whole film is full of highly personal portraits of people at Ealing Studios. It's no secret now, although I don't think he knew it at the time, that the part played by Cecil Parker is based on Sir Michael Balkan. And the other characters, the wheezy old asthmatic villain of the piece, Anesthesiager, is a portrait of Ernest Irving, who had very bad asthma. It serves me right, doesn't it, that I've got emphysema now for that rather sort of sadistic joke.
You are going ahead with production.
Sydney, I'd
like to think this over.
Most people think of the Alec Guinness character as an entirely idealistic and sympathetic young man. He's nothing of the sort. I think if you look at it closely, you'll see that he's just as selfish and self-interested as any of them. All that happens is the industrialists choose the wrong things to bribe him with. He could be easily bought off, as is suggested by an early scene in the picture, if he was given enormous research grants. He would quite willingly have forgotten the social implications of the story.